On the 9th of August 378 AD, a force of Gothic refugees under the command of Fritigern destroyed a Roman field army at Adrianople. Emperor Valens himself perished during the fighting. Coming from the Pontic steppe, these Goths fled the oppression of the Huns to take refuge in the Roman Empire. From this day onwards, various groups of Goths would strive for a safe home inside imperial territory. One of these groups, the Ostrogoths, would eventually establish a powerful kingdom at the heart of the classical empire. The aftermath of the Battle of Adrianople was chaotic. Gothic war bands ravaged the Danubian provinces while aiming to secure deals with the Roman authorities. This alternation of warfare and diplomacy saw the integration of many Goths into the army of Valens's elected successor, Theodosius. With imperial approval, a small group of Greuthungi Goths, led by Alathius and Saphrax, settled in Pannonia. After years of indecisive military actions, the larger group of mainly Thuringi Goths concluded a treaty with the emperor. They settled in Moesia as federated allies of the empire. In 386, another Greuthungi group under Odotheus made an attempt at crossing the Danube. This time, however, the Romans responded immediately, attacking during the crossing. Many of these Goths drowned in the river, and the survivors were settled in the Anatolian province of Phrygia. In 394, a prominent leader from the Moesian Goths, Alaric, helped Theodosius in defeating the usurper Eugenius. However, despite the heavy losses his men suffered during the battle, he was granted little reward, creating resentment. Meanwhile, the death of Theodosius triggered rivalries between the governments of Mediolanum and Constantinople. In this context, the western regent, Flavius Stilicho, sent a Goth named Gainas to eliminate his rival, Rufinus, in the eastern court. Gainas accomplished his mission successfully but failed to come to terms with the elite of Constantinople. When Tribigild led his Frisian Goths into rebellion, Gainas was sent to quell it. However, the Magister Militum decided instead to join forces with the rebel. Together, they marched on the capital. Once there, Gainas moved against his rival. The population disliked the new status quo. They rioted and killed thousands of Goths. This forced Gainas to flee northwest, where he was put to death by the Hunnic king Olden. After this event, the Goths of Phrygia disappeared as an influential political entity. In 410 AD, another dysfunctional relationship, this time between the Western court and the Goths of Alaric, led to the first sack of Rome in 700 years. These Goths then crossed the Alps into Gallia and became known as Visigoths. Meanwhile, the various Gothic groups which remained in and around the Danube basin would, in turn, become the Ostrogoths. Decades passed, and just as other Germanic tribes, much of the Eastern Goths came under the rule of the Huns. Under King Valamir, they participated in many raids on the imperial provinces. At the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, the Ostrogoths came face to face with their Visigothic cousins. The political structure of the Hunnic Empire allowed powerful Germanic chieftains to maintain a great degree of influence. The Amali dynasty of King Valamir was a prominent component of such politics. After the death of Attila, a Gepid-led coalition fought and defeated his son Elac at the Battle of Nedao. Despite playing little part in the battle, the Goths gained independence. In this same year, an Amali prince was born. Son of Theodemir, his name was Theodoric. As the Hunnic Empire crumbled, many Goths with imperial approval, settled in Pannonia and gradually formed a political entity. They later fought off a Hunnic counterattack, and in 458, some were recruited into Majorian's imperial army. While the official king at the time was Valamir, he shared the power with his brothers Widemir and Theodemir to a degree. Despite this, relations with the Romans could turn sour. Another important group of Goths in the Balkans were the Thracian Goths. Agitated by imperial favoritism to the latter, the Pannonian Goths raided Illyria until peace was restored with a renewed tribute from Emperor Leo. To solidify the agreement, the young Theodoric was sent to Constantinople as a hostage. After the Battle of Nedao, a new power balance was yet to be found in the Danube basin. Various tribes battled around the region to sustain themselves. In this context, a son of Attila invaded Valamir's territory, forcing the latter to rush back and inflict a crushing defeat on the Huns. For the Goths, this marked the final liberation from Hunnic domination. After that, border frictions with the Suebi led to war. Theodemir obtained a victory against the Suebi king Hunimund, whom he adopted as a son to prevent future conflicts. Once departed, however, Hunimund immediately sought revenge by allying with the Skiri. In a subsequent battle, Valamir perished, but not without inflicting heavy casualties on the enemy. Theodemir succeeded him as the preeminent king and faced an even greater coalition of Suebi, Skiri, Sarmatians, Gepids, Rugi and Heruli, which, on top of that, benefited from imperial support. In this struggle for survival, the Pannonian Goths emerged victorious. Following this episode of warfare, Theodoric was released from Roman captivity. Now back in Pannonia, the young man set out to prove his worth. He marched 6,000 men against the Sarmatians, defeated and killed their king Babai, reconquered Singidunum, and raided their territory. Theodoric was now a king alongside his father Theodemir and his uncle Widemir. In Constantinople, the semi-Gothic general Aspar fell victim to palace intrigue, causing a brief rebellion of the Thracian Goths. At about that time, the Pannonian Goths were recorded to besiege the city of Turnia with some success. Continued fighting against neighboring tribes, in addition to a famine, made the situation in Pannonia untenable. The two brothers, Theodemir and Widemir, decided to migrate in two opposite directions. Widemir went west for Italia. When he passed away during the journey, his followers struck a deal with the Western Emperor. With a payment from Glycerius, they crossed into Gallia and merged with their Visigothic cousins. Meanwhile, the main group under Theodemir went to the Eastern Empire. From Nisus, they continued south, attacked several cities, and besieged Thessalonica. After negotiations with the Eastern Emperor, they settled in Macedonia. Emperor Leo died and his successor, Zeno, had to fight for his throne against Basiliscus. For his part, Theodoric succeeded his father peacefully. This began a rivalry between Theodoric the Amal and the leader of the Thracian Goths, another Theodoric nicknamed Strabo. Since Strabo was no longer the undisputed favorite in Constantinople, both men now essentially competed for imperial favors. Strabo supported Basiliscus. Thus, when Zeno won the power struggle, he decided to favor the other Theodoric. To play the Goths against each other, Zeno requested the Amal to attack Strabo, promising imperial troops. The young king departed from Marcianopolis but did not receive the expected reinforcements. The armies met, skirmishes ensued, but no battle took place. Strabo urged the Amal to end this fight between Goths. Under pressure from his rival and his own people, the latter relented. Both men sent envoys to Zeno. One demanded supplies and new lands, the other his restoration to imperial offices. When the Amal refused a counteroffer from Zeno, the emperor switched to supporting Strabo instead, restoring his title of Magister Militum. After a brief offensive on Constantinople, the young Theodoric and his people plundered their way west. Negotiations resumed until the Goths reached Epirus. There, they suffered badly from a surprise attack by General Sabinianus. Meanwhile, Zeno was confronted with another usurper named Marcian, who allied with Strabo. The latter, however, arrived too late. The rebellion was crushed, and Strabo found himself at war with the emperor again. In 481, he attacked Constantinople, turned back, marched west into Macedonia, and accidentally impaled himself on a lance. For his part, the Amal raided Thessaly, sacking the city of Larissa. Zeno, who was occupied with yet another rebel, made concessions to the now only Theodoric. The latter received the title of Magister Militum Praesentalis, with headquarters at Novae, and was named consul for the year 484. Theodoric proceeded to murder Strabo's son, Reketak, absorbing his followers. The Ostrogoths were now united under the Amali leadership. After having defeated Zeno's enemy in the east, Theodoric was back in Novae, always in a precarious situation with insufficient imperial tributes. The Ostrogoths rebelled again. At that time, conflict arose between Zeno and the ruler of Italia, Odoacer. The Rugians, allies of the emperor, were defeated and expelled from Noricum. Their king Fritigern subsequently joined Theodoric at Novae. The young king then besieged Constantinople itself, making additional demands to Zeno. For about 15 years, the Ostrogoths had roamed through the Balkans, seeking a comfortable agreement with Constantinople, but still, hostilities seemed to never end. However, this time, Theodoric and Zeno concluded a deal that would truly benefit them both. Theodoric would march west, defeat Odoacer, and rule Italia on behalf of the emperor. For Zeno, it meant getting rid of two enemies at once, while for Theodoric, it meant at last plenty of lands for his people to settle. In the autumn of 488, the Ostrogoths departed from Novae. Roman provided supplies allowed the beginning of the voyage to be without issues. Once past Singidunum, however, their path was blocked by the hostile Gepids of Frostilla. The armies met at the river Ulca. Theodoric led his people to victory, allowing the march to resume. Crossing the Julian Alps, Theodoric marked a pause to wait for stragglers and recuperate. Awaiting him at the Isonzo River was Odoacer. The Ostrogoths attacked and defeated the enemy, who retreated to the next defensive position at Verona. There again, Theodoric obtained a clear victory and occupied the cities in the Po Valley. In Mediolanum, he met with Bishop Epiphanius of Pavia and welcomed the defection of General Tufa to his side. Theodoric sent Tufa to besiege Odoacer in Ravenna. However, Tufa switched sides again, allowing Odoacer to defeat an Ostrogothic force near Ravenna, counterattack, and recapture Mediolanum. Having withdrawn to Ticinum, Theodoric obtained reinforcements from Alaric II, tipping the scales in his favor again. At the Adda River, Theodoric, with his allies, decisively defeated the forces of Odoacer. The Gothic king restored his gains from the previous year, and for the second time, Odoacer retreated to Ravenna. Soon after, Theodoric arrived and initiated a difficult siege of a fortified city which could be resupplied by sea. In 491, Odoacer attempted a sally. He attacked Theodoric's camp at night, but was pushed back to the city. In Ticinum, the Rugians of Fritigern mistreated the local population. Theodoric chastised his allies for this behavior. In turn, they defeated the still resisting general Tufa. At about that time, a Burgundian army under Gundobad took advantage of the war to invade Liguria, take much booty, and capture many prisoners before returning beyond the Alps. The alliance of convenience between Fritigern and Tufa did not last long. They soon clashed in a bloody battle in which both men perished. After this event, the Rugians returned to Ostrogothic allegiance. With no more hope of a relief, and now a blockade of Ravenna by Gothic lightships, Odoacer understood the precarity of his situation and opened negotiations. In early 493, Odoacer surrendered to Theodoric on the condition that both men would rule Italia together. This state of affairs lasted no more than 10 days. When Odoacer came to visit his colleague, as they did frequently to one another, he was immobilized by Theodoric's men. Then Theodoric pulled his sword and sliced his victim apart. "Where is God?" supposedly cried Odoacer. "That is exactly what you did to my relatives," Theodoric responded. With his rival dead at his feet, he commented, "There wasn't a single bone in this wretch." What followed was a massacre of Odoacer's supporters inside and outside of Ravenna. His brother Onulphus took refuge in a church and was put down with arrows. His wife, Sonegilda, was starved to death in prison. His son, Thela, was initially spared and banished to Gallia, but was eventually killed as well. The ravaging 4-year-long war was at last over. Now the master of Italia, one of Theodoric's first decisions was to marry Odofleda, sister of Clovis, the king of the Franks. The new Ostrogothic ruling elite numbered only in the tens of thousands. To maintain ethnic cohesion, they settled mainly around the few urban centers including Ticinum, Verona, Ravenna, Rome, and the region of Picenum. Several garrisons were established throughout the peninsula. Theodoric decreed that all Italians who had not supported him during the war were to be deprived of the right to dispose of their property. However, a clerical delegation convinced him to revoke this decision. This event highlighted the main challenge going forward: strike a balance to satisfy both the Gothic elite and the Roman population. Dating from this period was a document called the Edictum Theodorici, generally attributed to Theodoric of the Ostrogoths. This legislative text applied to both Goths and Romans and addressed subjects such as adultery, riots, theft, slavery, corruption, justice, taxation, property rights, liberty, and marriage. Now securely in control, the king sent Bishop Epiphanius to the Burgundian court. His neighbors had raided Liguria during the war, and it was time to settle the matter. Epiphanius managed to pay for the release of 6,000 prisoners. Not only that, but Theodoric's daughter Ostrogotho married Gundobad's son Sigismund. In addition, the province of Liguria was allowed tax cuts for it to recover. Since 490, Theodoric had remained diplomatically connected to the imperial court, in an attempt to have his kingly position officialized. This continued until 497, when a delegation under Rufius Postumius Festus arrived in Constantinople. There now ruled Anastasius, who, at last, recognized Theodoric's newly acquired position. He was not only the king of the Ostrogoths, but, most importantly, he was the king of Italia on behalf of the emperor. Doctrinal debates were also brought to the table. 15 years prior, Zeno published a religious formula meant to unite the Christians of the empire, the Henoticon. While it found some popularity, it was rejected by many, including the papacy. leading to the Acacian Schism. Knowing that the current Pope, Anastasius II, was willing to cooperate, Festus promised Emperor Anastasius to have the Enoticon approved in Rome. However, upon his return, he discovered that Anastasius II had passed away. What followed was the election of two competing popes on the exact same day. One promoted reconciliation with the empire, Laurentius. The other was firmly anti-Enoticon, Symmachus. Both sides requested the dispute to be arbitrated by the king. Theodoric was an Arian, or more precisely, a Homoian Christian. This meant that he had no particular bias in this dispute involving the Roman Church. He decided to side with Symmachus, but the conflict would continue in the following years. Italia was majority Chalcedonian Christian, and Theodoric recognized that he could not change this reality. Thus, he opted for religious toleration and arbitrated local disputes upon request. In 500 AD, Theodoric departed from Ravenna with his retinue. He marched along the Via Flaminia and arrived at the Eternal City itself. There, he was welcomed by the Romans and portrayed himself as a benevolent monarch. He visited several monuments such as the Forum Romanum, the Arches of Constantine and Titus, the Via Sacra, and the Senate House. Chariot races were staged in the Circus Maximus, and an annual grain subsidy to Rome was re-established. The Praetorian prefect of Italia, Liberius, stepped down from his position. He was awarded the title of Patricius by Theodoric, and a successor was elected. As a way to secure his kingdom on the international scene, Theodoric forged alliances with his neighbors. His sister, Amalasuintha, was sent to Carthage to marry the Vandal king Thrasamund. She arrived with a military retinue of 1,000 bodyguards and 5,000 retainers. Another marriage was that of his daughter Theodegota with Alaric II of the Visigoths. The battle for the papacy was still ongoing. Laurentius's party was strong, keeping the schism alive. By 502, it had formulated several charges against Symmachus. One of these was that he celebrated Easter on the wrong date. Theodoric requested Symmachus's presence in Ariminum to answer for these charges. The pontiff arrived in the city but lost his nerve and fled back to Rome before the synod could take place. By this time, Symmachus was accused of additional charges, such as the illegal selling of church properties. Theodoric then ordered a synod of Italian bishops to be held in Rome itself to settle the matter. However, Symmachus refused to cooperate, and in the end, without him testifying in person, no action was taken against him. Subsequently, convinced by the anti-Symmachian party, Theodoric reinstated Laurentius, who took control of almost all important churches in Rome. Again, no clear resolution was reached. Theodoric and his Goths were considered Arian heretics by the population, but it did not stop him from sponsoring his faith. He built several Arian churches for his followers, including the Basilica of Saint Apollinaris in Ravenna. A short war occurred on the Danube. The Ostrogoths asserted control over Pannonia and Sirmium at the expense of the Gepids. On this occasion, a Gepid warlord named Mundus pledged allegiance to Theodoric and, with the Ostrogoths, defeated an imperial army. At Theodoric's court were many Roman statesmen of talent. One of them was Cassiodorus, a scholar who caught the attention of the king and was subsequently made Quaestor Palati. In a letter from King Theodoric to Emperor Anastasius, he wrote the following words: "Our royalty is an imitation of yours, modeled on your good purpose, and insofar as we follow you, do we excel all other nations." In Rome, the dispute continued, even causing violence between the followers of both popes. Now, Theodoric decided to end the schism once and for all. Laurentius was peacefully deposed and exiled, now fully replaced by Symmachus. While the Laurentian schism officially ended there, Symmachus still lacked universal approval. In Gallia, tensions rose between Franks, Burgundians, and Visigoths. Theodoric sent envoys in all directions, aiming to prevent the war from breaking out. It was to no avail. At the Battle of Vouillé, Clovis crushingly defeated Alaric II. The latter fell in battle, leaving his son Gessalek to face the Franco-Burgundian alliance. In the year 507, a prominent bishop by the name of Magnus Felix Enodius delivered a panegyric to Theodoric the Great. The king was praised for his various accomplishments in religion, politics, and war. Panegyrics were an established tradition in the Roman imperial world. In this way, Enodius presented Theodoric's kingdom as a continuation of imperial power in the west. The Ostrogothic king was willing to help the Visigoths against the Franks. It is in this context, possibly in 507, that Theodoric adopted a Heruli king named Rodulf. Despite this, Rodulf later perished in a war against the Lombards. The Thuringians were also courted for an alliance, and Theodoric's niece Amalaberga was married to King Hermanfrid. In Gallia, the Burgundians had taken Narbonne, pushing the Visigoths back to Hispania. Now isolated, the garrison of Arelate was besieged. It was then that the Ostrogoths intervened directly. Having assembled an army, Theodoric sent his general Iba to relieve the siege. When he arrived, he decisively defeated the invaders, saving Arelate from its fate. During this war, an imperial fleet raided the coast of Apulia in support of the Franks. From there, the Ostrogoths operated in two directions. A first army under Mamo went north to battle against the Burgundians. Meanwhile, the main force under Iba pushed west, driving the enemy out of Septimania and solidifying Gothic positions in southern Gallia. According to the historian Jordanes, 30,000 Franks perished during this campaign. In the year 510, Boethius, a Roman senator and scholar, was made a consul. His main achievement as an intellectual was the translation of many classical Greek texts into Latin. These included writings of Pythagoras, Ptolemy, Nicomachus, Euclid, Plato, and Aristotle. Boethius was praised by Theodoric himself and became one of several prominent Roman nobles at his court. The area of Provence had been ravaged by the war with the Franks and Burgundians. Not abandoning his new subjects to their fate, Theodoric sent shipments of food to Arelate and granted a local tax reduction. Through this recovering province, the king also re-established the Praetorian prefecture of Gallia, to which was affected the former prefect of Italia, Liberius. The message was clear: Theodoric and his Goths were the liberators of the Roman population against the Frankish invaders. Gessalek did not remain the Visigothic king for long, as he fell out of favor with the Ostrogoths. General Iba expelled him from Hispania and enthroned the child Amalaric in his place. The presence of Ostrogothic guardians at Amalaric's court created a relationship of tutelage with Theodoric, the latter taking effective control of the Visigothic kingdom. For his part, Gessalek traveled to the court of Thrasamund, from which he obtained support. He landed back in Hispania, but was defeated again. Gessalek fled to the Burgundians but was captured and executed in 513 before he could enter their kingdom. Theodoric did not miss the opportunity to chastise his supposed friend Thrasamund for his involvement in this affair. The Vandal king sent his apologies to Theodoric, which were accepted. The bishop of Arelate during this period was named Caesarius. previously accused of favoritism towards the Burgundians, he was later brought to Ravenna for the same kind of accusation. There, Theodoric decided to dismiss any charges set against the bishop. After that, Caesarius would use his connections with King Theodoric, Pope Symmachus, and Praetorian prefect Liberius to advance his bishopric's interests in Gallia. With the passing of Pope Symmachus and the election of Hormisdas, negotiations over the Acacian Schism resumed. Diplomacy between Rome and Constantinople lasted several years, with embassies being sent each way. Despite these efforts, nothing decisive was achieved until the death of Anastasius and the ascension of Justin I. On March 24, 519, the Acacian Schism was officially put to an end. Warming relations with Constantinople also allowed an Ostrogothic prince named Theodoric to be made consul for the year 519. He was the son-in-law but also the chosen heir of Theodoric. This election of an Arian Goth to the prestigious Roman consulship was, in a way, a synthesis of Theodoric's vision for his kingdom, an equilibrium between Ostrogothic and Roman interests. Later, Theodoric was allowed to elect the consuls for the year 522. This honor was attributed to Boethius' sons Symmachus and another Boethius. A few years after his consulship, Theodoric passed away, fragilizing the Amalei dynasty. The next heir in line was a child named Athalaric. In the same year, in the Burgundian kingdom, King Sigismund killed his son Sigeric. This Sigeric happened to be the grandson of Theodoric. In Vandal Africa, the death of Thrasamund caused Amalasuintha to be thrown into prison, where she soon died. The network of alliances Theodoric had built over the years was crumbling from all sides. During this late period of his reign, the king is recorded to have received a delegation of the far-away Esti tribe. Coming from the Baltic region, they brought gifts of amber to the court of Ravenna. Despite previous events, relations with the empire started to deteriorate. The new Justinianic dynasty began to persecute the Arian Christians. At the same time, the influence of the now firmly Chalcedonian imperial government grew inside Theodoric's realm, and it seemed that the Roman senatorial class was turning against him. Be it real or not, the king fell into paranoia and executed several high-ranking officials. When Boethius stood up to defend a friend from charges set against him, he was imprisoned in Ticinum and executed the following year. Later, Pope John I returned from a diplomatic mission to Constantinople, where he had, on the orders of Theodoric, negotiated the end of Arian persecutions. The king, suspicious as ever, put the man in jail. An army was sent across the Alps to retaliate against the murder of Sigeric. The Franks, however, had already killed Sigismund. Thus, General Tuluin was content to annex a portion of Burgundian territory. Theodoric ordered to build a fleet of 1,000 Romans in order to improve the logistics and defenses of his kingdom. Despite tax hikes meant to finance this massive project, the final number of constructed ships was nowhere near the initial objective of 1,000 units. Whether Theodoric planned to use this fleet to retaliate against Hilderic for the death of his sister is unclear. If he was indeed preparing for such an expedition, he ran out of time. Theodoric the Great passed away in late August 526. His kingship lasted 55 years, 3 decades of which he ruled as a king of a flourishing Italian peninsula. His body was placed inside the mausoleum in Ravenna, a monument which stands to this day. With the support of powerful men like Cassiodorus and Tuluin, the teenage Athalaric succeeded his grandfather while his mother, Amalasuintha, assumed the regency. Amalasuintha prioritized good relations with Constantinople, resumed the policy of cooperation with the senatorial elite of Italia, and allowed the building of great churches for the Chalcedonian community. King Amalaric, by now a young man, peacefully negotiated the end of Ostrogothic suzerainty and the tribute he had paid so far. Thus ended 15 years of Theodoric's ambition of a Gothic superstate. In 530, a brief papal schism occurred. The previous Pope Felix IV, a direct ally of the Ostrogothic monarchy, favored a certain Bonifacius for a successor. However, when he died, the majority of the clergy turned to Dioscorus. The passing away of Dioscorus weeks later put an end to this conflict. Amalasuintha pushed for a proper Roman education for her son. The Ostrogothic nobility, however, disapproved and, instead, seemingly influenced Athalaric into a life of excess. As both sides plotted against each other, the endangered regent even considered fleeing to the safety of the empire. Amalaric proved himself to be a harsh king. A fanatic Arian Christian, he had a terrible relation with his Chalcedonian wife Clotilde. During a military campaign, he was defeated by the Franks and killed. The crown passed to Theodis, an Ostrogothic noble living in the Visigothic court since the times of Theodoric the Great. He would, however, act independently and not become a puppet of Ravenna. Frankish power was also felt in Thuringia. There, King Hermanafrid was defeated and executed. His wife Amalaberga returned to her family among the Ostrogoths. In Ravenna, Amalasuintha made Cassiodorus Praetorian prefect and allowed the imperial fleet, which was heading to Africa, to resupply in Sicily. This would result in a decisive victory for the Roman army, which reconquered Africa for the empire. Athalaric prematurely died at only 18 years old, leaving his mother in an even more precarious situation. Amalasuintha did not step down and instead sought new allies to guarantee her rule. For that, she chose her cousin, Theodahad, to whom she gave the title of king. It would not satisfy the man for long, however. Turning against Amalasuintha, Theodahad had her jailed, exiled, and eventually assassinated. While the nobility supported Theodahad, the latter was not exactly an ideal monarch for them. He was a philosopher, not a warrior. This assassination provided, in fact, the casus belli Emperor Justinian wanted to attack the Ostrogoths. Theodahad opened diplomatic talks and did everything in his power to prevent the war. The Roman demands were heavy and included the surrender of the prosperous island of Sicily to the empire. No agreement was reached. The war began in Illyria, where Mundus, now in the service of the Roman army, captured Salona. The Gepids participated in the war by taking Sirmium. Meanwhile, another front opened in Sicily with the invasion of General Belisarius. Only the garrison of Panormus resisted for a time. By the end of 535, the entirety of the island was lost to the Imperials. Meanwhile, brutal fighting occurred in Dalmatia. Asinarius and Grippas attacked the Romans and killed Mauritius, son of Mundus. The latter, enraged, counterattacked, defeated the Goths, but perished during the pursuit. This led the Goths to briefly occupy Salona before imperial forces retook it. Theodahad sent Pope Agapetus to negotiate with Justinian. While this desperate attempt at conciliation failed, Theodahad changed his mind. With the halt of the imperial advance in Dalmatia, in addition to a revolt in Africa, the king felt emboldened. He refused to abdicate the throne, surrendered Provence to the Franks in exchange for military support, and elevated a pro-Gothic pope in Rome. Negotiations broke down. the imperial army crossed the Straits of Messina and besieged Naples. Here again, the garrison stood defiant and refused the calls to surrender. However, the Romans soon discovered a secret passage going through an abandoned aqueduct. They took the city and committed a massacre of the population. It was becoming clear that Theodahad was not the military commander the Goths needed. It would not take long before the army elevated an actual general named Vitiges. His men chased down Theodahad and killed him before he could reach Ravenna. Vitiges left the Eternal City for the capital. With local support, the Imperials occupied Rome, just as the Gothic garrison evacuated the city. Additionally, Narnia, Spolitium and Perusia fell to Roman detachments. Vitiges sent a counterattack, which was defeated by General Constantinus. In Ravenna, the king, in opposition to his predecessor, legitimized his power with his military experience. In order to link himself to the Amali line, Vitiges married Amalasuintha, the daughter of Amalasuintha. He confirmed the diplomatic treaty with the Franks, thus freeing troops at the Alpine border. Back on the Illyrian front, the Gothic forces counterattacked. While Asinarius gathered Suebi allies, Uligisalus went straight for the enemy but was repelled. When Asinarius arrived and the Ostrogoths blockaded Salona from land and sea, they found the Romans in a solid defensive position. During the siege, they inflicted a defeat on the Gothic fleet. Unable to take the city, the Goths evacuated Illyria. With a now considerable army of about 30,000 men, Vitiges isolated Belisarius inside Rome. This siege developed into a long drawn-out conflict with frequent skirmishes and sallies. Despite having a larger army and investing greatly into the siege, the Goths struggled considerably against the well-organized Romans. There was an attempt at storming the city during a truce with the defenders, but that failed. With the Romans receiving gradual reinforcements and capturing additional cities in the north, the Ostrogoths, after a year-long investment, abandoned the Eternal City. Vitiges' defeat greatly afflicted his reputation as a military leader. During the siege, the king had ordered a massacre of the senators in Ravenna. Subsequently, Cassiodorus left the service of the Ostrogothic monarchy to start a new life in Constantinople. Vitiges moved to Ariminum to recapture it from a recently established Roman garrison. However, when Roman reinforcements arrived, the Goths were tricked into thinking they faced a larger force and left. By now, famines afflicted the Italian population, and as if it was not enough, the city of Mediolanum defected to the Romans, who took control of the area in the process. What followed was a slow progress of the imperial forces in central Italia. Disunity among the enemy commanders allowed Uraeus, Vitiges' nephew, to move against Mediolanum. Much of his army consisted of allied Burgundians sent by the Franks. After a long siege, the garrison surrendered. What followed was a brutal massacre of the population. After that, Uraeus cleared Liguria of Roman presence. The decisive contest of the year 539 occurred at Auximum. There, the strong garrison faced Belisarius' army. During this siege, the Frankish king Theodebert invaded the Po Valley. Romans and Goths, having both made deals with the Franks, were stunned to see the latter attack them both. Thankfully, an outbreak of disease forced the invaders to withdraw. Auximum fell and Ravenna itself was soon under siege. Additional Roman troops arrived from Illyria, causing more cities to surrender. Ostrogothic resistance slowly crumbled as the soldiers feared for their families' fates. Supply issues caused the situation inside Ravenna to deteriorate as well. After some diplomatic talks with the Franks, Vitiges ultimately turned to the Imperials for a peaceful resolution. Emperor Justinian offered lenient terms. The Goths would keep control of the Po Valley and pay tribute to Constantinople. However, it seems that Belisarius, aiming for a complete victory, refused to sign the treaty. Then Vitiges and his nobles suggested to Belisarius to take over Italia himself as a new Western emperor. Belisarius agreed, but once inside Ravenna, he betrayed his word, captured Vitiges and his family, and returned to Constantinople. This failure by the Romans to strike a legitimate peace deal with the Ostrogoths would ultimately play in the latter's favor. With Vitiges deposed, the Gothic leadership looked for a new king. Urias, in charge of Ticinum, was an obvious candidate. However, he decided to turn down the offer in favor of Ildibad, who controlled Verona and was a nephew of King Theodis. Ildibad inflicted a decisive defeat against the imperial army of Vitellius at Treviso. This allowed the reconquest of lost territories in northern Italia. This same year, political rivalries led Ildibad to execute Urias. After that, the king was himself murdered during a banquet. This led the Rugian allies to elevate their own candidate, Eraric. The new king reopened negotiations with Constantinople. This alienated the Ostrogothic nobility who, instead, supported Ildibad's nephew Totila. Eraric was killed and Totila took power. A Roman army was about to take Verona when a Gothic counterattack forced the enemy to retreat. Totila pursued and decisively defeated the enemy at Faventia. The revitalized Ostrogoths faced a disorganized, unpaid Roman army, while a war with Persia and the plague weakened the empire's capacity to respond. For his part, the captive Vitiges passed away in Constantinople. Now with a firm grip over northern Italia, Totila marched south and besieged Florentia. When Roman reinforcements arrived, the Goths retreated, then counterattacked, obtaining yet another decisive victory. Totila led his army south, taking Beneventum and much territory in the countryside. Now Naples was besieged. After 2 relief attempts, the commander Conon surrendered. The king continued his military campaigns while reopening negotiations with Constantinople. In Apulia, an attempt at taking Dryas failed, after which offensive operations resumed in central Italia. The Ostrogoths focused on the cities around the Via Flaminia and eventually besieged Rome itself. The defenders, blockaded, faced starvation. A relief attempt under Belisarius failed, and the Ostrogoths captured the city. Despite this, Belisarius managed to convince Totila not to raze the city. Thus, the king was content with a limited sack and the partial destruction of the walls. After that, Totila rushed to Apulia to repel another Roman army. Belisarius took advantage of that to occupy what remained of Rome, forcing the king to return. This time, he failed to retake the Eternal City, which was by now a shadow of its former self. Totila's strategy revolved around winning over the Italians by means of merciful behavior. However, this conflicted with the fact that he also raised city walls, committed sacks, and extorted money to maintain his army on the field. While his campaigns were generally successful, several coastal strongholds were still resisting. In 548, a palace uprising killed King Theodis. His successor, Theodegisel, another Ostrogothic strongman, suffered the same fate. This severed diplomatic ties with Hispania for good and erased the chance of a Visigothic intervention in the war. The next year, Rome had to endure yet another grinding siege. It continued until Totila bribed Isaurian soldiers to open the gates. So far, Totila had shown himself merciful to the Italian population. However, this time, his patience ran out. Many, including the garrison, were killed. At about that time, the king made a final attempt at diplomacy, offering great concessions. Justinian refused this proposal. The Gothic War would not end in a peaceful agreement. Totila reinvested the Eternal City, repaired buildings, and staged the last recorded chariot races in the Circus Maximus. The next target was Sicily. The Goths proceeded to pillage the island as if it was enemy territory, and besieged the city of Syracuse for a time. Defending it was an old ally of Theodoric, now in the service of the empire, the former Praetorian prefect of Gallia, Liberius. The attack in Sicily convinced Constantinople to defeat Totila for good. A political move was made to create division among the Ostrogoths. Germanus, Justinian's cousin, was appointed to gather a large army for the upcoming offensive. He took as a second wife Witigis' widow and Theodoric's granddaughter, Amalasuintha. Germanus, however, fell ill and died, postponing the operation. In 551, an important Gothic fleet made a successful raid on imperial territory, attacking the island of Corfu and the coast of Epirus. In the same year, Corsica and Sardinia were conquered. Now, the Goths besieged the city of Ancona, which they blockaded by land and sea. The Romans displayed their naval superiority when they decisively defeated the Gothic fleet, sinking 36 vessels. The 11 remaining ships were burned on the shore by the retreating Goths. The siege of Ancona had failed. What followed was the arrival of a massive imperial force under Narses. This man had replaced Germanus for the offensive into Italia and was now forcing his way through Venetia. Despite the Goths' best efforts to prevent the Roman army from advancing, it still managed to reach Ravenna. Totila confronted the enemy at Tagane in Umbria, at a place called Busta Gallorum. When both armies faced each other, the king bought as much time as possible, until General Thea arrived with reinforcements. Totila led cavalry charges against the Roman lines, but these assaults failed. Receiving archer fire from two sides and now frontally attacked, the Gothic army broke and fled. Totila, the man who defied the imperial might for a decade, perished during or after the battle. Narses went straight to Rome for a short siege, at the end of which the garrison surrendered. Thea, who survived, succeeded Totila. In Ticinum, he executed a large number of hostages, gathered what resources he could, and appealed to the Franks for help. He then marched south to link up with his brother Fritigern, who guarded the greater part of the Gothic treasury at Cumae. He managed to reach his destination and came face to face with Narses near Mount Vesuvius. No fighting occurred for 2 months, until the Goths were forced to confront the enemy directly. For 2 days, the Battle of Mount Lactarius raged. Thea fell during the fighting, Fritigern surrendered, the Goths were defeated. Still, a small number of troops retreated and continued the resistance in some cities. The next year, the Franks invaded Italia as Gothic allies. A first army was ambushed by Roman forces and disintegrated due to a disease outbreak. The second army confronted Narses in battle and was crushed. In 555, at Kemsa, a large remnant of the Ostrogothic army capitulated. The definitive end of the Gothic War occurred in 562, when the last strongholds of Verona and Brixia fell. The Ostrogothic kingdom had been destroyed once and for all. What remained of the Ostrogoths either left or remained in Italia and eventually disappeared from historical records. After their emergence as a distinct people in the 5th century, the Ostrogoths went through many successes and hardships. they struggled for survival for decades between aggressive rival tribes and deceitful Romans. Eventually, their great king, Theodoric, led them to the rich lands of Italia to found a new home and establish decades of peace and prosperity at the heart of the classical empire. Competing interests between Goths and Romans, however, led to the infamous Gothic War. Despite the ultimate Roman victory, this two-decade-long struggle left Italia in ruin. It would not be long before the Lombards took their turn at invading the peninsula, turning it into a divided battleground for centuries to come.